The alarms were already ringing when Commander Rollick stepped onto the bridge of the alien research ship Vesha. Red lights flashed across the ceiling. The floor trembled under his feet, like something large was striking the hull from the outside. His crew moved in sharp, nervous motions, tapping at controls and reading confused data streams. This was not supposed to happen. They had come to this dead world because it was quiet, still, and harmless. At least, that was what they believed. Rollick stared at the main screen. The planet below was dark and cracked, covered in old scars from wars no one remembered. But something else moved there now. Something bright. Something waking up. He felt a cold spike of fear when he saw the numbers rising. Heat levels. Radiation. Power readings that made no sense. Before he could speak, the ship shuddered again, this time harder, as if a giant hand pushed the vessel away from orbit. "Where is the human?" Rollick demanded. No one answered at first. They all knew who he meant. The human prisoner. The one they captured during a border raid. The one who had shouted warnings at them the moment they began scanning this planet. The one who said, again and again, "Do not wake it. Do not touch what sleeps here. It is not meant to rise." Rollick had laughed then. Humans were known for bold words and wild fear stories. He did not laugh now. A junior officer finally spoke. "The human is still in holding room 4, Commander." "Bring him here," Rollick said. "Now." The officer ran. Another impact shook the ship. The lights flickered. On the screen, a crack split the planet's surface like the lid of an old tomb breaking open. A pulse of white fire shot upward, brushing the ship's shields. The brightness was so sharp that several crew members looked away. Rollick whispered, "What have we done?" Minutes later, the officer returned with the human. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with tired eyes and a face marked with small scars. His hands were locked by shock cuffs, but he walked calmly, even as the ship groaned around them. The human looked at the screen. He let out a slow breath. "You woke it," he said quietly. "Of course you did." Rollick stepped forward. "What is it? Tell us now." The human did not answer right away. He stared at the growing light inside the planet, like he was watching an old nightmare return. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, but full of something heavy. "A weapon," he said. "But not one built by humans. Not one built by any race you know. It's older than all of us. Older than most stars. We call it a sleeper machine. My people found stories about it. Records from ancient explorers who never came back." Rollick frowned. "Then how do you know this is true?" "Because," the human said, "the ones who escaped left warnings. And every warning said the same thing. If you wake a sleeper machine, it will not stop. It will cleanse the sky. It will remake everything it sees. It will burn until nothing living remains. And then it will go back to sleep again." Rollick felt his throat tighten. "A machine that kills everything?" "Yes," the human said. "On a scale you cannot imagine." Another blast of energy struck the shields. Sparks burst from the wall near the engineering console. A crew member cried out and fell. The ship tilted. The human continued speaking, calm despite the chaos. "But that is not the worst part. The sleeper machines are not only weapons. They are watchers. They wake when they sense any attempt to disturb the worlds where they rest. They were placed on purpose. Set to guard something. Something buried deep under the crust." Rollick felt the room spin. "Guard what?" The human looked straight at him. "Something none of us want to meet." The screen flashed again. A column of light, thick as a mountain, burst from a new crack in the surface. It rose toward space, glowing brighter, louder, until the ship's sensors could no longer process the data. Everything became static. Even the deck plates vibrated like they were about to break apart. "Shut it down," Rollick shouted to his bridge crew. "Pull us away from orbit." "We can't," a pilot cried. "Something is locking us in place." It felt like invisible chains wrapped around the Vesha, holding it above the opening planet. The ship strained against the force, engines roaring, but it did not move an inch. The human closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were filled with a calm, cold certainty. "You should have listened," he said. "I tried to warn you. My people tried to warn everyone. But no one ever listens." The floor buckled. Screens exploded. A loud, deep sound, like metal bending in the hands of a giant, echoed through the bridge. Then a shadow rose from the planet. Not a shape. Not a form. Just a darkness so dense it swallowed the light around it. It lifted slowly, like something stretching its limbs after a long sleep. The human whispered, almost to himself, "It's awake." Rollick felt his heart drop. "What do we do?" he asked. The human looked at him, his expression empty of hope. "You run," he said. "If it lets you." The shadow rising from the cracked planet pulled the light out of the sky. It did not have arms or legs or a face, not yet. It was only a mass of shifting black shapes and glowing veins of white fire, like something trying to remember what form it once had. Every time it moved, the ship's metal groaned as though it feared the thing below. Commander Rollick forced himself to stand. The bridge smelled of burning circuits. Crew members fought to keep systems online, but every panel flickered with confused symbols. Nothing was built to understand what they were seeing. Rollick pointed at the human. "You said to run." "We cannot. Something holds us here." The human nodded. "The sleeper machine is pulling you in. It hates anything that tries to look at it. And your scans woke it." Rollick hissed in frustration. "Then tell us how to stop it." The human looked at the rising darkness. "You don't stop it. You survive it." "Maybe." That maybe struck the crew harder than the ship's shaking. A tall alien officer, Shaq, stepped forward. "Why would humans know so much about this?" he demanded. "Your people are young. Weak. You could not have fought something like this." The human's expression did not change. "We didn't fight it. The ones who first found it died. But the warnings they left were clear." Another blast of energy swept past the ship, so loud the entire crew covered their ears. On the screen, the shadow spread outward like wings unfolding. The planet beneath it cracked open, sending huge pieces of glowing rock floating into space. Rollick felt cold fear settle in his bones. "Helm. Engines to full. Pull us away with everything we have." The pilot tried. The engine screamed. Power markers climbed until they flashed unsafe levels. The ship vibrated harder, shaking like it was about to tear apart. But they did not move. Not even a meter. Then the shadow turned. It did not have eyes. It did not need them. The darkness shifted toward the Vesha, and the bridge filled with a strange low hum, like a whisper spoken by 1,000 metal mouths. The human stiffened. "It's scanning us." Rollick stared at him. "Scanning?" "Yes," the human said quietly. "It wants to know if you are a threat." Shaq barked, "We are a threat. We command war fleets. Armies. We." The ship jolted so hard that every crew member stumbled. A stream of dark fire wrapped around the vessel like a serpent, pressing so tight the hull started to indent. The human spoke without raising his voice. "You are not a threat to that." Panels exploded on the ceiling. Sparks rained down like burning snow. A crew member screamed as metal from a ruptured console cut across his arm. Yet the shadows outside only tightened. Rollick looked back to the human. "What does it want?" "To finish waking up," the human said. "And it sees you as noise. Something to erase." The hull let out a deep, painful creak. Systems dimmed. The human stepped forward, ignoring the shock cuffs around his wrists. "You need to release me." Shaq snapped, "Never. You are a prisoner." The human turned toward the screen, watching the sleeper machine drag them into its growing field of darkness. His voice stayed calm, too calm for the situation. "If you don't release me, everyone here dies." Rollick stared at him. The human was unarmed, outnumbered, trapped. But the way he spoke made it sound like he was the only solid rock in a river of chaos. Rollick stepped past Shaq. "Unlock him." Shaq looked shocked. "Commander. That is an order." Shaq hit the release. The cuffs fell to the ground with a faint clink. The human flexed his hands and moved to the nearest console. The crew recoiled as if he carried a disease. "What are you doing?" Rollick asked. "Finding a frequency," the human said. "The sleeper machines all have one. A heartbeat. A pattern older than any species we know. If I can match it, even for a moment, I can distract it." "Distract it?" Shaq repeated. "That's your plan?" "It's the only one," the human said. "You cannot fight it. You can only confuse it long enough to run." His fingers danced over the controls with surprising skill. The ship shook again. A wall panel tore loose and crashed to the floor. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Oxygen alarms rang. On the screen, the darkness moved closer, like a giant turning its head. The human's voice was tight. "I need Silence. The entire bridge froze. The only sound was the ship groaning under impossible pressure. Then the human pressed a single key. A deep, slow tone filled the bridge. Not a sound of danger. A sound like something breathing in a quiet cave, ancient and patient. The darkness outside flickered. The ship stopped shaking. Crew members looked at each other in disbelief. It worked, the pilot whispered. It stopped. The human didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen. You have 30 seconds to escape. Rollick shouted, engines. Full power. Now. The engines roared again. And this time the ship moved, slowly at first, then faster, pulling away from the shadow. But before they could clear the gravity field, the darkness shifted again. The sleeper machine began to turn back toward them. Shaq's voice broke. It knows. The human stepped away from the console. No, he said. It just decided to follow. Rollick looked at him in horror. Follow us? Why? The human met his eyes. Because it wants to know who woke it. And it does not forget. The Vesha fled through space, its engines burning hotter than they were ever meant to burn. The ship left a long trail of glowing blue fire behind it, a desperate sign of escape. But no matter how fast they went, the darkness from the planet followed. It did not chase like a living creature. It drifted, calm and steady, as if the distance between them meant nothing. Commander Rollick paced behind the pilot, his claws tapping against the metal floor. Every few seconds he looked at the rear sensors. The shadow was always there. Always the same distance away. Never losing ground. Never rushing. Just following. How far until we reach safe space? He asked. The pilot shook his head. At this speed? 3 hours. Maybe more. Rollick glanced at the human. Will it follow us that long? The human didn't answer at first. He stood with his arms crossed, eyes fixed on the data scrolling across a cracked screen. After a quiet moment, he finally replied. It will follow you as long as it wants to. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't stop. It doesn't question. Shaq scoffed. Nothing has infinite power. The human turned toward him. That thing does. Not in the way you think. It doesn't burn fuel. It doesn't run on reactors. It eats energy. Anything nearby, heat, motion, radiation, even ship engines, it takes it. The more you give off, the stronger it becomes. Rollick froze. Are you saying our engines are feeding it? Yes, the human said simply. A thick silence fell over the bridge. The pilot stopped breathing for a moment, staring ahead with wide eyes. Rollick forced himself to speak. If we slow down, it will catch us. If you speed up, the human replied, it will still catch you. Faster. The ship groaned again, but this time it wasn't from an attack. It was fear. Fear in the air. Fear in the silence. Fear in the eyes of every alien aboard. Shaq slammed his fist on a console. Then what do we do? Tell us, human. You claim to know so much. Give us a real answer. The human didn't flinch. He walked toward the main window. Stars streaked past in long, thin lines. The darkness behind them grew larger, like it was absorbing the starlight. My people learned one thing from our records, he said. A sleeper machine does not chase unless triggered. You triggered it. You woke it. So now, it sees you as part of its purpose. Its purpose? Rollick repeated. It was designed to remove threats, the human said. To clean the galaxy. To watch over something buried deep in that world. If anything disturbs the ground above it, anything, it rises. Rollick felt a chill crawl up his spine. What is buried there? We don't know, the human said. And it's best we never find out. The lights flickered again. A faint vibration passed through the ship, like a heartbeat that wasn't theirs. Shaq pointed at the screen. What is it doing now? The shadow behind them expanded, stretching out long tendrils of shimmering black. Each tendril moved in a slow pattern, like waves on a dark ocean. It's learning us, the human said. Studying our shape. Our mass. Our energy. Studying? Rollick asked. The human nodded. So it can erase us better. A deep metallic groan echoed through the bridge. Several crew members stepped away from the walls, fear rising again. The pilot looked back. It's speeding up. Rollick hissed. How? You said it moves at a fixed pace. I said it doesn't need to move fast, the human corrected. But it can. The shadow closed the distance little by little. What once was kilometers was now meters. The darkness swirled like smoke underwater. "Commander!" the pilot shouted. "If it gets any closer, it will touch the hull." Rollick made a decision. Divert all remaining power to a jump. The pilot's hands flew across controls. A blind jump? We might appear inside a star. "Better that than dying here," Rollick snapped. The human stepped forward quickly. "Wait." Everyone stopped. "If you jump now," he said, "it might follow the jump signature. And if it does, it will tear this ship apart mid-transition." Rollick stared at him. "So we can't run. We can't hide. We can't fight. Then what choice is left to us?" The human closed his eyes. "Your ship has escape pods." Shaq spat. "We cannot outrun it in those. They are slower." The human opened his eyes slowly. "Not fast enough to escape. But small enough to be ignored." Rollick froze. He understood immediately. "You want us to scatter?" "Yes," the human said. "Fragments. Pieces. Many small signals instead of one. The sleeper machine will lose interest. It will stay locked onto the largest energy source." Rollick stared at him. "The largest source? Meaning the main ship?" "Meaning me," the human said. The bridge fell silent again. The crew stared at him with confusion, fear, and something close to disbelief. "You would stay behind?" Rollick asked quietly. The human shrugged. "I'm the reason you got away from it once. I can keep its attention for a little longer." Shaq shook his head angrily. "You would die." The human's voice was calm. "You all will die if someone doesn't distract it." Rollick moved closer. "Why would a human risk himself for us? We imprisoned you. We mocked your warnings." The human gave a small, tired smile. "Because I already saw what happens when a sleeper machine finishes waking. And because you're not my enemy." Another alarm blared, sharp, urgent, final. The shadow reached the hull. A deep thump echoed through the ship. Rollick looked at the human. "Prepare the escape pods," the commander said quietly. "All of them." The human nodded. "We don't have much time." The sound of the sleeper machine pressing against the hull spread through the ship like a slow, heavy heartbeat. Every metal panel vibrated. Every light flickered. It felt like the Vesha was being pushed down by the weight of a planet. The bridge crew moved fast now, their motions shaking with fear, but they obeyed Rollick's orders without hesitation. "Get to the escape decks," Rollick shouted. "Move." Shaq hesitated. His eyes shifted from the human to the commander. "We cannot trust him. This could be a trap." Rollick glared at him. "He warned us. He saved us. And he is the only reason we are still alive." He lowered his voice. "We trust him now." The human stepped back from the main screen, watching the shadow outside slide over the hull like living oil. Thin tendrils scraped across the metal. Sparks jumped. The ship creaked like bones under pressure. The human spoke firmly. "If you don't scatter now, it will crush the ship. Go." Rollick nodded and motioned toward the exit. The crew rushed out in groups. Some stumbled, some cried, some whispered prayers in languages the human didn't know. But they all ran. The ship shook again, and the floor buckled in one corner. The human steadied himself. Rollick stayed beside him. "You should go too," the human said. Rollick shook his head. "A commander is last to leave. That is our code." The human gave a faint smile. "Not a good code, today." Rollick looked at him, a strange sadness in his eyes. "What will you actually do when we launch the pods? You said you would distract it. How?" The human turned to a cracked console and brought up power controls. "The sleeper machine is watching the biggest energy source. That will be the ship. When you launch the pods, I'll overload everything. Reactors. Thrusters. Shield coils. I'll make the ship flare like a star." He paused. "It will follow the bright signal." Rollick understood. "And destroy you with the ship." The human shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe not." Rollick frowned. "You cannot survive that." The human hesitated for the first time. "I've survived worse than most people think. Humans are good at that." Another deep thump rolled through the walls. This time, a section of ceiling collapsed near the bridge entrance. A storm of sparks rained down. Rollick jumped back. The human didn't move. Rollick grabbed the human's arm. "Come with us. We will find another way." The human looked him in the eyes. If I leave, the large signal leaves. The sleeper machine will follow all of you. And none of your pods will outrun it. Rollick slowly released his grip. He knew the human was right. But his breaths grew heavy. His scales trembled. Why help us? Rollick whispered. The human exhaled. Because your people didn't deserve this, and because someone needs to stand between that thing and the rest of the galaxy. Rollick's jaw clenched. I will remember your name. You don't know my name. Tell me. The human stared at the broken screen, the shadows crawling outside. It doesn't matter. Rollick shook his head. It matters to me. Before the human answered, another huge impact shook the ship. The main screen shattered. The bridge lights died. Only faint emergency lamps remained. From the hallway, Shaq shouted, Commander. We must go. Rollick stepped back from the human, his eyes full of the pain of a decision he didn't want to make. Will you at least activate a timer? A delay? So you don't die immediately? The human nodded. I'll try. Rollick nodded once, stepped through the ruined doorway, then looked back one last time. May the stars guide you, human. The human gave a faint smile. May they guide you too. Rollick ran. The human stood alone in the bridge now. He listened as the sound of rushing feet faded down the corridor. The alarms beeped softly in the dark. The hull groaned like it was about to split. He whispered, all right. Let's do this. He reached the main reactor controls. Half the screens were dead, but he worked quickly, tapping keys, bridging burnt circuits, forcing power through broken lines. Red warnings flashed everywhere. He overrode them all. The ship trembled. Energy surged. The engines screamed louder than ever. Far below the hull, the sleeper machine wrapped itself tighter around the vessel. The shadow thickened. The walls bent inward like soft clay. Escape pods began firing from the sides of the ship, one, then another, then 10 more. Tiny white flashes dotted the darkness of space. They scattered in all directions. The sleeper machine didn't notice them. The human watched the sensor feed. The shadow kept its attention fixed on the main ship. He whispered, good. He activated the overload sequence. There was a soft chime. The timer blinked to life. 0:02. 2 minutes. He looked at the number and let out a slow breath. Plenty of time. The human glanced at the ruined bridge door. He felt something inside him tighten. Then he turned back to the controls and locked the sequence. 0:01 and 32 seconds. The ship groaned louder. 0:01. The shadow outside swelled, like it sensed the growing energy. 0 hours and 30 seconds. The human gripped the console. Then, suddenly, the lights around him flickered, and a message flashed across the broken screen. Escape pod launch detected, pilot, Rollick. The human's eyes widened. Rollick hadn't left. The commander had waited. Hidden. Then launched in the last pod. The human swore under his breath. Idiot. He reached for the cancel command. But the countdown reached. 0 hours and 3 seconds. He froze. There was no canceling it now. The shadow wrapped fully around the ship. 0 hours and 1 second. The human closed his eyes. And the ship exploded. The explosion lit space like a silent star being born. The Vesha vanished in a flash of white and blue light that stretched across the darkness. Escape pods far away felt the shockwave as a soft vibration through their thin hulls. Many crew members shielded their eyes even though the glare could not hurt them at that distance. Rollick sat strapped inside his pod, staring at the fading light. His claws dug into the metal armrests. He did not blink. He did not breathe for several seconds. His chest felt tight, like something heavy pressed against his heart. He whispered, human. The pod floated alone at first, tumbling gently through the silence. The other pods were out there somewhere, scattered in all directions, just as the human planned. They were small, cold, and carried almost no energy signal. But Rollick's pod carried one thing the others did not: guilt. He had left the human behind. He had watched him set the timer, and though he had stayed until the last moment, hiding in the hall as long as he could, he still left him to die. He whispered again, may the stars forgive you. And forgive me. He lowered his head. Then the rear sensors beeped. Rollick froze. He lifted his eyes and looked at the tiny rear screen. At first, he thought it was a malfunction. A glitch. A dying circuit sending wrong readings. But no. The shadow still lived. Out of the spreading clouds of fire and debris, the sleeper machine rose again. Its dark mass twisted through the fading explosion light. Flames were absorbed into its body like drops of water falling into a deep ocean. It grew brighter for a moment, its veins glowing white-hot. Then it dimmed, and began to move. Not at the scattered pods, but toward the center of the blast. Toward the last place the human had stood. Rollick's breath caught. It survived the explosion. He felt fear twist inside him again, but something else too. A strange confusion. Why is it searching the wreckage? He whispered. There is nothing alive there. Nothing left. But the sleeper machine drifted through the glowing debris cloud, moving slowly, almost carefully, as if hunting for something small. Bits of ship plating vaporized when they touched its surface. Broken metal curled inward before turning to dust. But the shadow kept searching. Rollick watched, unable to look away. Minutes passed. The other escape pods sent tight band messages to his receiver. Commander, are you alive? We are safe for now. What is happening? Is it gone? Commander Rollick, answer. Rollick ignored them. He kept watching the monster. Suddenly, a twisted beam of metal drifted aside, and Rollick saw something behind it. A faint signal. A single blinking light. Not an escape pod. Not a ship. A small emergency survival capsule, one of the bridge rigs used by humans. Something tiny. Designed to deploy only when everything else failed. Rollick's heart stopped. No. He didn't die. On the screen, the capsule spun slowly. Its hull was cracked. Its oxygen tank flickered. But it was intact. Inside that capsule, the human might still breathe. Rollick felt a surge of hope so strong it hurt. But then the hope died almost instantly. The sleeper machine saw the capsule too. The shadow paused. It tilted, like a beast sniffing the air. Its tendrils curled inward, glowing faintly. Then it began moving toward the capsule. Rollick's claws scraped the console. No. Leave him. His pod could not go fast. The engines were barely engines at all, just small puffs of gas meant to steer, not escape. But Rollick did not think. He slammed the manual override and fired every thruster he had. The pod lurched forward. Alarms blared. He didn't care. He whispered through clenched teeth, he saved us. I will not let him die now. But the sleeper machine closed the distance with terrifying ease. It moved like drifting smoke, effortless and silent. The capsule was only 20 meters from its shadow now. Rollick pushed his engines harder. The pod shook like it was splitting apart. Sparks jumped from the control board. The shadow reached out. Rollick shouted, faster. The pod jerked again, another thruster overloading. The shadow's tendril touched the capsule. But instead of destroying it, the shadow stopped. It floated there, tendril resting on the capsule like a giant finger touching something fragile. The glow inside the machine pulsed slowly. Rollick's eyes widened. Why? Isn't it killing him? The tendril curled around the capsule. Gently. Carefully. As if the sleeper machine was not destroying, but examining. Watching. Recognizing. Rollick felt a chill that cut deeper than fear. Does it know him? The tendril lifted the capsule. The sleeper machine drew it closer to its core, the brightest part of its shifting body. The glow increased. The shadow pulsed like a heart. Rollick whispered, no. That is not possible. It does not feel. It does not think. It does not choose. But what he was seeing said otherwise. Or something even stranger. The capsule's light blinked again. Weak. But steady. The human was still alive. And the sleeper machine. It did not kill him. It held him. Protected him. Then the shadow slowly turned away from the pods and the debris field. With the capsule held tight in its tendrils, the sleeper machine began drifting back toward the cracked planet where it had awakened. Rollick felt ice run through every vein. He whispered, why is it bringing him back? No answer. Only the fading silhouette of the ancient machine carrying the lone human down to the wounded world below. The cracked planet grew larger on Rollick's screen as the sleeper machine drifted downward, carrying the human's tiny survival capsule in its dark tendrils. The escape pods floated far behind now, safely hidden in the cold of space. None of them dared move. None dared speak. They all waited for Rollick's orders. But Rollick had no order to give. He could only watch. The shadow wrapped around the capsule like a cocoon, shielding it from the burning atmosphere below. As the planet's broken crust came into view, glowing cracks of molten stone spread like veins across the surface. The sleeper machine slipped between those cracks, moving deeper into a canyon split open by its awakening. Rollick whispered, "It is taking him inside." "Why?" The image disappeared in a burst of static. The pod's sensors couldn't follow the sleeper machine underground. Rollick smacked the side of the console in frustration. "Come back. Show me more." But the screen stayed dead. Silence filled the pod. For the first time since he became commander, Rollick felt completely powerless. He wanted to save the human. He wanted to at least try. But all he had was a tiny drifting capsule and a view of dead space. A voice crackled through the comm, filled with fear. It was Vshek. "Commander. We lost visual on the machine. Should we regroup?" Rollick stared into the darkness below the cracked planet. "No. Not yet. Not until I know what happened to him." More voices joined the channel. "Commander, he is only one human. You cannot save him. We must flee, before it comes back." Rollick slammed his claw on the console. Silence. His roar echoed through every pod speaker. The comm went quiet. Rollick lowered his voice. "That human saved all of us. He faced the sleeper machine alone. He sacrificed himself. And he might still be alive." He took a deep breath. "And I will not abandon him." The channel stayed silent, but no one argued anymore. Rollick switched off the comms and stared again at the planet. Minutes passed. Then a small signal blinked on the sensor screen. Weak. Buried. Faint like a heartbeat heard through stone. Rollick leaned forward. "Is that?" Another blink. Then another. A distress beacon. "Human. Still alive." Rollick's breath shook. "He's sending a signal. But why?" He wouldn't risk waking it again. The beacon pulsed slowly. Too slowly. Like someone who was half conscious, barely holding on. Rollick ran the signal through the translator. It was weak and scrambled, but a few words cracked through the noise. "Not alone. Deeper. Waking. More." Rollick froze. "More?" he whispered. "More what?" The message resumed. "Machine. Not only one." Rollick's scales prickled. His claws tightened around the console. Not only one. The sleeper machine was one among others. Rollick whispered, "There are more of them on this world." But the message continued, broken, shaky, like the human was whispering through pain. "Not threat. To me. It knows. Human. Code." Rollick blinked in confusion. "What code?" Another short burst. "Linked. To old ones. Humans. Part of design." Rollick felt cold spread through his chest. "Humans. Part of the design? That cannot be true," Rollick said to himself. "Humans are young. Loud. Chaotic. They destroy their own worlds." But the sleeper machine had spared the human when it destroyed everything else. It had reached for him gently. It had carried him below, not to kill, but to show something. Or to reveal something. The message continued, weaker now. Machine. Follows directive. Humans. Allowed. Keyholders. Rollick whispered, "Keyholders of what?" The screen flickered. More static. Then. Buried. In the deep. Something old. Not machine. Something else. Rollick felt his heart's pounding. Something below the planet. Something the sleeper machines guarded. Something older than them. The human's voice cracked through the static once more. "I can see it. Rollick. Tell them. Don't come here. Don't dig. Don't search. Let it sleep." Then the signal cut. Rollick leaned back in his seat, staring at the dead screen. He was shaking. Not from fear of the sleeper machine. But from fear of what was beneath it. After several long minutes, Rollick keyed the comms back on. His voice was steady, but his hands were trembling. "All pods, listen carefully. The human is alive. But he is beneath the planet. And he sent a warning." Whispers filled the channel. Rollick spoke over them. He said this was not the only sleeper machine. There are more. Many more. Silence. And they guard something. More silence. Something the human says must never wake. A crew member asked, voice trembling, "Commander. What do we do?" Rollick looked again at the cracked planet, glowing like a giant wound. Then he made his decision. We do not return. We do not approach. We do not scan. We do not speak of this planet again. He took a deep breath. We will find the nearest friendly port. We will report that the Vesha was lost in a reactor collapse. That is all. Shaq hissed through the comm, shocked. Commander. You want us to lie to our leaders? Yes, Rollick said without hesitation. Why? Rollick stared at the empty space where the sleeper machine had vanished. Because if they ever come here. His voice grew quiet. They will wake what sleeps beneath. The comm stayed dead silent. Rollick closed his eyes. But then. A new signal flashed on the screen. Weak. Short. Human. 3 words. Not a warning. Not a cry for help. Just a message. Don't come back. Then silence again. The escape pods drifted together hours later, locking into a loose formation under Rollick's command. The cracked planet was now a shrinking shape behind them, slowly fading into darkness. None of the crew spoke as they waited for rescue ships from their fleet. The silence felt heavy, like the space around them was holding its breath. Rollick sat alone in his pod, staring at the last message from the human. 3 small words on the screen, don't come back. He replayed them again and again. The warning felt colder every time. Beside his pod, Shaq's voice finally broke the long quiet. Commander. Do you believe he still lives down there? Rollick did not answer at first. His eyes stayed fixed on the drifting world behind them, dead, cracked, quiet once more. But something inside him refused to accept the human had died. Yes, Rollick said at last. I believe he lives. Shaq hesitated. Then why not send a rescue team? Rollick turned slowly toward the comm. His voice was steady, but heavy. Because he told us not to. Shaq didn't argue. No one did. A soft beep came from Rollick's console. The long-range fleet beacon had finally connected. Within an hour, 3 large cruisers approached. Their deep blue engines glowed brighter than the small pods floating in space. Rescue crews began locking onto the pods, pulling each survivor aboard. When the hatch opened and Rollick stepped onto the deck of the cruiser, the crew saluted him. They looked ready to ask 100 questions. But Rollick raised one claw. No questions, he said quietly. Not here. The officers didn't understand, but they obeyed. Inside the commander's briefing room, high-ranking officials waited for him. Their eyes were sharp. Their expressions were stern. They demanded answers. Where is the Vesha? One asked. Destroyed, Rollick replied. How? Reactor collapse. Why were your escape pods scattered? Standard survival procedure. And what of the human prisoner? Rollick paused. The officials leaned forward. Rollick answered, lost with the ship. It was a lie. But one that carried the weight of truth in Rollick's chest. The officials seemed satisfied, at least on the surface. They wrote down his statements, nodded, and left to deliver their report to the Fleet Council. When the doors closed, Rollick stood alone in the quiet room. He pressed a claw to his forehead and whispered, Forgive me. But I will not let them wake you. He stepped away from the table, but before he could leave, Shaq entered. The doors slid shut behind him. Commander, Shaq said in a low voice. You lied to them. Yes. Then lie to me less. Tell me the truth. Rollick looked at his old officer. The two had served together for years. Shaq had once doubted every word the human spoke. Now, he looked like he feared every word might have been true. Rollick told him everything. The capsule. The message. The warnings. The revelation that humans, somehow, were connected to the ancient machines. That the sleeper machines weren't simply weapons. They were guardians. And that something older than all known species slept beneath that broken world. By the time Rollick finished speaking, Shaq's scales had turned a pale gray, the color of deep fear. You think the human is with it still? Shaq asked softly. Rollick nodded. It carried him away. It did not kill him. It protected him. That cannot be ignored. Shaq whispered, then what is he now? A prisoner? Chosen? Rollick didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that the sleeper machine had recognized something in the human, something Rollick could not understand. Later that night, long after the crew had been settled and the pods stored, Rollick stood in his private quarters. The stars drifted outside the window, peaceful, unaware of the ancient danger they had nearly woken. Rollick spoke softly to the empty room. Human. Wherever you are. I hope the machine does not harm you. He touched the window glass with his claw. And I hope you never let it wake what sleeps below. Meanwhile, deep beneath the cracked planet, the sleeper machine descended into a vast chamber of stone and dim blue light. The human's capsule hovered within its tendrils. The air down here was old, older than stars, older than history. Strange symbols glowed on the walls, pulsing like veins. The sleeper machine lowered the capsule gently onto a smooth platform. It withdrew its tendrils slowly, almost respectfully. Inside the capsule, the human stirred. His eyes blinked open. At first he saw nothing but darkness and faint blue haze. Then he saw the towering shadow standing before him, the sleeper machine, watching him with no eyes, no face, nothing but silent presence. The human whispered, "You didn't kill me." The machine's core pulsed once, like a heartbeat. The chamber shook in response, as though something even deeper had turned in its sleep. The human breathed out slowly. "You brought me here for a reason. Didn't you?" The machine shifted its shadowed mass and pointed a thin tendril toward the far wall. The human turned. Carved into the ancient stone was a large circular door. Sealed. Covered in symbols older than any empire. It radiated cold power and danger. The human felt a shiver move down his spine. He whispered, "That's what you're guarding." The sleeper machine pulsed again, soft, warning, protective. The human understood. Whatever lay behind that door was not meant to wake. Not now. Not ever. He placed a hand on the inside of the capsule window and whispered the same words he had sent to Rollick. "Don't come back." The sleeper machine surrounded the capsule again, guarding it, guarding him, guarding the door. Above them, the cracked planet grew quiet once more. And what slept below stayed sleeping. For now.